Coming up on this week's episode of TechSNAP, you know that Adobe breach we told you about? Turns out it's 10 times worse than originally reported. We'll share the details. Plus, PHP.net gets compromised, and then it's our guide to setting up a future-proof storage array. All that and a heck of a lot more on this week's episode of TechSNAP. Everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 134 of Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly systems network and administration podcast. We stream this episode live on a spooky October 31st, 2013. This episode is brought to you by our two fine sponsors, Godaddy.com and Ting.com. I'll tell you more about those sponsors as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by the incredible ScaleEngine.com. Go over to ScaleEngine.com and check out what it can do for you. My name is Chris, and joining us every single week is our host, the admin, the tech, and the teacher, Mr. Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan.
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Or should I say Chief Engineer Alan Jude?
Sure.
Very nice, sir. Very nice. And I wanted to point out your comm badge, metal.
Yes.
That's legit.
That's real.
That's. I was saying on the live stream earlier that if I had thought ahead, I would have got myself a costume. But if I would have bought what you bought, it'd be embarrassing because pictures of me just wearing it all the time would show up on the internet because I would not be able to get it. Star Trek costume's the perfect outfit. So
yeah.
Well, so you just got back, Mr. Jet Setter. How was your trip to VBSDCon, right?
Yeah, it was great. The conference was very well organized. VeriSign has a team of people because they run like VeriSign specific conferences.
Oh yeah.
To get customers and stuff.
Yeah.
And so they had this whole team of people that know how to do all this stuff. And then combine that with the fact that, they have a bunch of FreeBSD users and a bunch of the actual sysadmins that work at VeriSign had been to conferences before and kind of, they managed to take the best of a bunch of different conferences and put it together. So it's got, there were some regular talks, kind of like a BSDCan or a EuroBSDCon, but also they had some of the unconference style stuff from MeetBSD.
Yeah.
So yeah, all the talks were great, but on top of that, we had birds of a feather sessions, where everybody when they registered for the conference listed 3 or 4 topics that they were interested in, and so everybody divided up into groups based on those. So I went to the ZFS one, and so it was me and 15 or 20 other people in the room, and just talking about ZFS, and it was really interesting the dynamic you got from having people that have never actually used ZFS before, people who are just starting, people like me who use it a lot but don't. I'm not a programmer. I don't really know the internals that well.
Mm-hmm.
I can admin the shit out of it, but as far as what's going on in the background, I have a limited perspective.
Right. Sure.
But we also had people like Justin Gibbs, who works on ZFS full time at SpectraLogic, and he could tell us a bit about ZFSD, which is this a daemon to make things like automatic hot spare replacement work.
Oh, very nice.
And they have this system they're working on so that the OS will know where in the chassis the drive is.
Oh, yes.
Because normally with the device numbering, if you pull a hard drive out of like slot 4 and plug a new one in slot 32, it might get that device name of the one that was in 4, right?
Well, so it's also, for me, when I sat down at a machine that I'd never used before, I didn't know which drives were which, and I just knew I had 9 drives or something like that. I can't remember how many drives I had on 12 drives,
yep.
And one of them was dead.
Right.
I didn't know which one or where it was in this stack, right? So,
exactly.
Yeah, that's really handy.
Yeah, and so, the biggest thing is so that if you pull a drive out, if you put a fresh drive in the same spot, it can start resilvering right away. But if you add a drive to a different spot, it won't use that one unless you tell it to. Which is the expected behavior, right?
How was the trip, though? I mean, did you get good food? That's the stuff I want to know about, Alan. Did you eat well?
The food was great. On the first night, we had sliders. So there was pulled pork.
Oh, what's up?
Cheeseburgers with bacon and chicken.
Yes.
And there was sushi and appetizers and desserts and all kinds of stuff. It was great. The second night, there was like prime rib, like roast beef, and what else do we have? All kinds of potatoes, and they had a stir fry station and all kinds of stuff.
Son of a gun, Alan.
Yep.
All right.
And then lunch the first day, we had like chicken marsala and stuff. And the second day, we had I forget. All kinds of stuff.
I saw you got just a little harassment from the TSA. Nothing too bad.
The harassment from the TSA was on the way home. The I think it was the girl running the scanning machine was being trained by like a supervisor, and so they were overly fastidious and wondering what this. When they look through the bag, they see like, well, that looks kind of like a camera, and there's a giant metal sphere, and it's got things coming out of it, and there's just wires everywhere.
That does look pretty suspicious.
What the hell is it? And so they're like, we'd like to look inside your bag. Would that be okay? I'm like, sure.
Excuse me, sir. Could you open this up?
Like, what the hell is this? I'm like, that's a microphone. It's called a snowball. It's like, it doesn't look like a snowball. I'm like, see, it says right on the side, snowball. It's like, I agree, it doesn't look like a snowball, but.
Yeah, that was that with wires and a microphone, and you looked at
I had
the X-ray.
like Ethernet cables, camera cables. I have my sleep phones, right? They're like, it's a headband with earphones built in, so you can put it on and go to sleep.
Oh yeah,
and there were wires everywhere.
Sleep phones are good. I opt for the under the pillow speaker, but I could see.
Right, but these are the ones I use for when I'm traveling.
Traveling, yeah.
They're nice. They also double as a blindfold.
And they kind of keep your face warm. Right?
Sure.
I find that comforting. That's all. I was just showing.
Normally it's on the forehead, but I put it over my eyes sometimes, if I'm worried that bright light's going to wake me up or something.
Your travel buddy took great risk by taking this photo of you.
I'm not sure what the risk is, but it's generally kind of frowned upon to take pictures of stuff.
Yeah, well, there you go. So I'm glad you made it through the TSA and you made it back, and we didn't even miss a beat down. We're right here.
And they didn't take my spork.
Oh, good.
In the goodie bag that we got, some people got like little screwdriver set, and I got this titanium spork that's a bottle opener and stuff.
Nice.
And some people were tweeting that they got theirs taken away, but I think they were so distracted by the microphone that they didn't even pay attention to my other bag.
Well, so we should celebrate, I say, by having a big show. What do you think? You want to have a big show?
Sure.
Okay. All right. Well, why don't we start by talking about this Adobe story that sounded like it was probably going to be a much bigger deal than what we knew about at the time. So remember when Curbs on Security came out and said, hey, man, we just found this huge dump of data on these servers. Turns out a bunch of Adobe stuff's in there. Well, that was just the beginning of the story,
right? There was like 2 million, 2 point something million users had their passwords hashes leaked, and the source code for was like Acrobat and Cold Fusion were taken, and a couple other things. And it's like, well, turns out it was actually 38 million active users who had their password hashes stolen.
Ouch.
Over the weekend, anonnews.org posted users.tar.gz, which I don't know why they wouldn't have X-edited it to make it smaller. But anyway, it includes more than 150 million username and password hashes, although Adobe claims most of those are inactive or test accounts, and that there were only 38 million active accounts. Although Adobe's definition of active might be paid us. So.
Or, maybe. Yeah.
Well, if you don't have any payment information in there, username and password is less of an issue. But either way, basically the entire database, right?
Yeah.
150 million password pairs. So, yeah. And also they revealed that among the original list of applications, the entire source code for the Photoshop family of products was taken. So when Krebs was looking at the dump, there was this ps1.tar file, but it was password protected or something, and they couldn't open it. But then anonnews.org posted it, and their copy wasn't password protected. And it has the entire source code for Photoshop. So
they didn't happen to say which version, right? No, I'm scanning
I think
right
the
now.
latest.
Oh, really?
Like recent.
Wow.
Source code.
That's rough for them, huh?
Well, I don't know. It's not like GIMP's going to be able to just take the source code and start adding features or something, right? Because it's all be patent and copyright
I
violations.
suppose so, and it's not like Photoshop is a huge attack surface. So
well, probably could be, but more worrying to the rest of us is Acrobat, right? That's the thing that
for sure.
every business computer has installed on it that is already usually the biggest attack vector.
I like
but, if they have the whole source code for Photoshop, you could get a pirated copy of Photoshop that doesn't even, you could just compile out the copy protection.
Right. Or you know what? It'd be a great way to insert malware onto the GPU. Because, Photoshop's got all those instructions to talk to the GPU. You just use that as a way to get it on there. You don't really need to.
But that seems like
a lot of work.
Yeah, you can target a video game much better.
Yeah, or just
do one of those
batch script.
Free to play video game. Here, download this and run it. And now your video card works for us.
Yeah.
Surprised no one's made a Bitcoin game.
There's a few, but yeah. I guess
a game that when
Mines.
you're not playing it is using your video card.
Didn't we cover a story about a game company that tried to do that?
Oh no, an employee at the game company that included it in their updater. Yes,
right.
I remember that now.
Yeah.
But mostly, I think it's currently video cards don't make enough coins unless you. Well, if you had
not anymore.
People's computer. If you had 1 million of them, it might.
Yeah.
And if you're not paying for the electricity for it, it helps a lot.
Right. Huh. So now what we have here is technically really Adobe's flagship products. The source code's been leaking out there. 38. What was the number of accounts?
38 million, at least 38 million active users.
That's unbelievable.
To have their passwords reset.
40 million users is nothing to sneeze at.
A company spokesman said that Adobe has no indication that there have been any unauthorized activity on any of the Adobe accounts yet. But if the username and password hashes are leaked on Anon News, you can expect that to change. As of that time, nobody had the passwords to crack them except for the attackers. Now it's been publicly published. People can start cracking those and start going at them. It might be interesting to see a couple months from now somebody publishes a study on what the passwords looked like once they were brute forced. Do most people at Adobe have the word photo in their password or something? Also, for some reason, I just expect people who buy Photoshop to have weak passwords. I don't know. Artists seems like the type of people that wouldn't take a strong password very seriously. I'm not trying to be disparaging. I'm just...
No, it's just you are.
Right. It's not on purpose.
No, I see what you mean is like... Well, first of all, it's just when you're buying Photoshop and setting up a Creative Cloud account, probably your first thought is not security.
Right. And, you're just trying to draw pictures or edit photos or whatever. So it'd be really interesting, if the data includes an email address, it might be fun to go through and see how many of those email addresses use the same password as their Adobe account.
Well, what gets me about this is, and I know I mentioned this last time we talked about this, but I'm a little offended that Adobe as a company, and it's just I'm picking on them because I'm sure lots of companies do this, decided our future is the cloud, and we're going to take all of our customers who've been buying box software with CDs and loading it on their computers. We're going to take all those people, and we're going to move them onto an online hosted system where their software is always connected, where they have to authorize with accounts, they have to have payment details attached to every account, and we're going to just store all this, and this is going to be part of our core. This is how we're going to deliver the software that pays the bills for our thousands of employees. And yet, when they made that transition, they didn't follow up on their end, what I consider to be their responsibility to make sure that this stuff was totally safe and ready for this kind of thing. Because if you make this move, that's the keys to the kingdom. This is your whole business.
Yeah. And whereas before you could have gone to a store and bought Photoshop with cash, now you have to use a credit card and maybe it got stolen because of this.
I guess, it was...
So as part of Adobe's resolution for this, Adobe is offering their customers a free year's worth of credit monitoring, which is fairly standard.
Yeah.
Funny story, free credit monitoring comes from Experian. Didn't we just talk about it? Oh, yeah, last week.
Yeah, what were they selling?
Experian is the company that's selling personal data to identity thieves.
Okay, great. Well, let me go sign up for that.
That's what you want from your credit monitoring service. It's like, we will monitor your credit, and then we will even catch the bad guys we sold your data to as they try to use your identity.
So here we are now, but still no details on the type of encryption that was used for the usernames and passwords.
You're right, because it was probably hashing. If it was encryption, that's horrible, because that means if somebody cracks the one key, that would give them every password, probably.
But we don't know what they were using.
Right. I'm surprised that Krebs didn't have the information, because if the hashes were posted, it should be fairly easy to tell just by looking at them. I'm sad to say I imagine it's just MD5 or something.
Interesting. First comment on Krebs' post. What kind of hash was used for the passwords? Hope they're using some salt.
No reply.
Otherwise,
Krebs is usually pretty good about replying to questions.
yeah. Let's see here. I'm looking to see if he did. It doesn't look like he has.
Okay. Well, he seems like he's really busy now.
Yeah. Interesting.
But yes, it'd be nice to find that out. If Adobe was doing anything interesting.
I think it maybe is more telling nobody said anything, because that almost to me indicates that it's probably something weak and they're trying to keep that. They don't want to say.
If the file's out there on a non-news, you could just grab it.
That's true. Well, I don't know then. All right. I guess people just haven't gotten it through their dumb heads that this is the kind of information we want. I feel like Adobe should be out. I feel like when this happens, all of a sudden they got to put their cards on the table and say, all right, well, here's what you need to know now as somebody who was just violated by our malpractice. Here's the information you need to protect yourself.
What I'd rather see is that a company advertise how they're storing your password before you sign up.
Right, yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Although
right?
that would just be very confusing to regular users.
But do you see what I'm saying? Like, make it as part, like, if we could have, and I hate saying, let's create laws and stuff like that.
If it's not bcrypt, scrypt, or SHA 256 or 512 crypt, if the hashing thing doesn't have the word crypt in it, I don't even want to talk to you.
But you Canadians have like this law that says, okay, if your information's been compromised, you have to notify your customers, right? Don't you guys have?
Yes, the Personal Privacy PIPEDA.
So
Personal Information and Privacy Protection Act or something.
It'd be nice if they attached to that. And I totally acknowledge that 98% of people couldn't give two craps what type of hashing was used or whatever. But IT admins for large companies who have the software deployed care very much. And guys like you and I care very much. Why not make that part of the disclosure? Okay, we've had 38 million accounts compromised. They were taken from, at this time for this date range, and this type of hashing was used on the password database. And then we all know what kind of steps, how worried we need to get about this. I guess everybody should take the same steps regardless, but it feels like they owe us that information now that they've made this mistake.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes, here it is. It's the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act. And it mandates that all Canadian businesses follow specific procedures when collecting, storing, using, and disclosing personal information in the course of commercial business.
It's interesting. The Independent called it Adobe cyber attack 10 times worse.
Right, because originally it was like 2-point-something million, and now it's 38 million.
Yeah, okay.
So 10 times as many people.
Oh, jeez, Adobe. Way to go. Way to go. All right, Alan, any other thoughts on that story?
No, that's it for that one.
All right, then I want to take just a moment right here, right now, and thank our first sponsor this week, and that is GoDaddy.com. GoDaddy.com has a great deal that's been going on for a little bit now, but who knows? Who knows? It could end at any time, so take advantage of it while you can. Use the code TECH199 when you check out. You're going to get a .com over at GoDaddy.com, the world's #1 domain name registrar, a .com for $1.99. What would you do for a $1.99 .com? What would you do with that? I'll tell you what I did with it. I bought jbtitles.com during a show. During the show, someone was like, you should just, I think it was Chase during Unfiltered, he's like, you know what you ought to do? You ought to just buy jbtitles.com and forward that to this long URL you guys use. I was like, oh.
Yeah, instead of having, well, because even the bit.ly wasn't really that short.
No, and bit.ly is awkward. So
I just got it.
jbtitles.com. You know what? I should. $1.99. Why would I not, right? And check this out. So this is, check this out, Alan. This is what's so cool about the GoDads is I don't have to point this at any particular host or service or whatever I need. I can buy the domain, and then when I was ready to pull the trigger, I logged into their great admin panel, clicked on the new domain that I bought, brought up the forwarding system, and look at this. Look how simple this UI is. I click right here. I put in the URL I want it to forward to, and then I click Save. DNS gets updated, and now all the visitors that go to jbtitles.com, GoDaddy does the forwarding for them in the background. It makes taking a .com and pointing at something long and complicated much easier. Plus, if you've got a few .coms that you've bought at one point and you're not using them now, or .nets or .orgs or whatever, go into your control panel and point them at something. Why not just have them point to something? Why not do that? So there's many reasons why you might want a .com for a small business, for a team, or for even an individual. If you use the code TECH199 when you check out over at GoDaddy.com, you're going to get that .com for $1.99. I love GoDaddy, and they are definitely kicking up a notch. They've got a whole bunch of new services over there. If you haven't been to GoDaddy for a while, it's time to go see what they're offering now. A lot of new things. Very cool. And stuff that if you are like me, where you're kind of in that phase where you got a lot of things to do in a day, and running your business is one of those things that gets sort of put off to the side more than it should, they're rolling out a whole bunch of new tools to make life easier for folks like me. So it's pretty exciting stuff. So go over to GoDaddy.com and use the code TECH199 when you check out. And thanks to GoDaddy for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Okay, Alan.
Yep.
So every now and then we like to talk about the PHP on this show. You know,
Little bit.
the personal homepage, which I know it's not called that anymore.
It was never called that.
PHP? Personal homepages? Sure it was.
No.
Yeah, it was? Sure it was. Are you joking with me?
Pretty sure that's never what it stood for.
Really? Okay, here, I'll go read it to you.
Anyway, it's the PHP hypertext preprocessor. Now, I know it had some other name.
The original
before,
stand for personal homepage. It did. I swear.
Well, that was horrible, and that's why they replaced it with the PHP hypertext
exactly.
preprocessor, which is actually what it is.
I know, it was a bad name. Well, and it also kind of made it sound like small time. So they had to class it up a little bit.
Whereas, it wouldn't make sense for something like Facebook to be developed in that, right?
Yeah. But PHP.net itself, the home of PHP's, had a little bit of trouble, hasn't it?
Well, it was interesting because Google started blocking PHP.net with its standard safe browsing warning saying that it contained malware. And so the guys that host the PHP cluster were like, oh, well, that must be a false positive. There must be some problem. So they're trying to go through Webmaster Tools and figure it out, but the Webmaster Tools doesn't always say what the reason you were flagged is right away.
Or
it takes
Google,
a while.
Google will flag your site, and then the Webmaster Tools gets updated at some later point.
Right. So basically, the site's flagged, but you can't tell why just yet. You have to wait for Webmaster Tools to catch up.
Meanwhile, nobody can hit your site. It's using Chrome.
And when it did, it looked like it was just a false positive because there's some minified/obfuscated JavaScript injected by the userprefs.js file. And, if you inject it in a certain way, Google might think that looks malicious. But, they were like, oh, it seems like a false positive. Because when they checked the site, they didn't see anything. But when they looked again later, all of a sudden there was something. And they looked again and it was gone. We were very confused. And, when they checked out the whole Git repository, it all seemed fine. And it turns out that 2 of the servers at PHP.net were compromised.
Oh.
And the malactors would write the modified files in, causing people that hit those 2 servers out of the cluster to get the malicious content. But then their staging system would automatically overwrite those servers with a new checkout from Git. And so the malware would go away. But the server was compromised, so they would just put the malware back. So it was kind of fun. And so that's why it was so inconsistent, and they were having a hard time tracking it down.
Yeah, boy, that combined with the Webmaster Tools not being updated would throw you for a loop.
Yeah. So they've taken those 2 servers out of the rotation to, they're not in the pool anymore for their serving the website. They've also temporarily disabled SSL access to PHP.net until they can get a new SSL certificate because they, as a precaution, consider their SSL key compromised. Because those 2 servers that were compromised had a copy of the key. So
Yes.
so they're going to have to revoke their SSL certificate and get a new one.
Yeah.
Or reissue it anyway, with a new private key. And so a small percentage of PHP.net users between October 22nd and the 24th may have been exposed to malware. But if you used Firefox or Chrome or any other browser that uses the Google Safe Browsing system, then you might have been saved. Also, over the next few days, PHP.net will initiate a password reset. End users won't have any, so if you had an account for commenting or whatever, your password won't have to be reset because it wasn't on that server. But anyone who actually commits code to the projects will have their password reset for Git and things like that.
Yeah. That's probably a safe precaution.
Yeah, and as part of this, the PHP.net systems team will audit every server operated by PHP.net, and they found that only those 2 servers were compromised.
It doesn't sound like they know exactly how this happened.
I'm not sure. The server hosted PHP.net, static.php.net, git.php.net, and the server that hosts bugs.php.net.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
All those services have been migrated off those servers, and they verified with their Git repository that nothing malicious was actually committed to Git.
Looking at their PHP.net page here, it looks like they're kind of still in damage control because it says they're going to do a postmortem in the coming days.
Yes, they're still doing that. So basically, they pulled those compromised servers off, set them aside so they can do the postmortem. In the meantime, they've been rushing around deploying new servers, getting all that work, and then they can go do the postmortem after.
Yeah.
And they've also put their Git repositories in read-only mode until they finish all the password resets and everything.
It's always funny whenever a sort of an upstream open source, what I mean by upstream in this case is a lot of people that build stuff off of it. When open source project has these kind of compromises, you will find it gets spun into FUD. Like surprisingly,
Sometimes
it can be like, wait a minute, that's a non-issue that was totally resolved. What are we worried about? And then years later, it can come back up as part of like a conspiracy theory.
Oh yeah, remember when PHP got compromised?
Yeah, exactly. It's like well, but that wasn't a big deal. Try to remember what distribution it was a couple of years ago. Was it Debian?
I don't know. I know Debian still gets made fun of every time the subject of random number comes up.
Yeah.
Because they've goofed on that like 4 times, right?
I guess what I'm saying is so I feel like, as you might have noticed based on comments we got after last week's episode, people are thinking a lot about PHP, replacing PHP, a lot of discussion around PHP. Do you think
it depends what you're doing. I don't know. I'm a bit of a ninja in PHP. I've never found anything I couldn't do.
So for you, it doesn't really change the game at all. It's kind of...
Well, it's like, I don't really have a compelling reason to go and learn Python.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah.
I know other people like it better, and, there's a reason why FreeNAS switched from PHP to Python. Mostly, I think, because they had Python programmers.
Well, that doesn't...
everybody likes what they like. Lately I've gained a whole new appreciation for what you can do in shell script. Like plain born shell script, not even bash. Like FreeBSD, stock, SH, shell script.
Yeah. Hey.
It's like you can do that.
Shell script's all I've ever needed, man. It's all I've ever needed.
Like Devin replaced 2 C programs with bits of shell script.
I think that's a good way to go because I can read shell script, first of all.
Exactly. Well, that was my kind of comment about the installer.
Yeah.
It's like the people who are having to modify the installer in some way to be able to, do mass deployments, they're not developers. They're most likely sysadmins. So if we could replace this and that and this bit of C that are in the installer for like the partitioning system, it's like I understand dealing with the partitioning is a lot easier and less lines of code in C. But if it wasn't shell, somebody could more easily modify it. And, the counter argument from the people that wrote it in C in the first place was that they're not as good at shell. And so who's going to maintain it? And if none of the FreeBSD developers can read it because it's in shell and not C, and they're all good at C and not shell, then how's it going to go like that, right? And you can see the argument from both sides, but...
the chat room seems to be pretty... I'm reading the chat room right now. They seem to be pretty pro shell script. I guess the one argument they have in there for Python is that it's easy.
It's easy if it's the first thing you learn, maybe? I don't know. I'm so set in the way the languages I've learned that Python looked like crazy to me. But I haven't really looked at it that strongly because, I have a couple apps that need Python or use Python, and sure, whatever. But I'm trying to get away from having to write any code in my job. It's like,
yeah,
we hired a programmer so that I could focus on sysadminning.
Yep, very well. I do know exactly what you mean. That's why I want to hire an editor. By the way, if anybody watching is in the Washington area and knows how to use Final Cut, email Angela at jupiterbroadcasting.com because I won't ever see it. But I do want an editor because it's kind of the same thing. It's like, well, if I was not editing, I'd have about 8 hours more a week or more that I'd have back. And it's the same thing for you in programming. It's like, well, if I could focus on other things.
Yeah, it's like, well, we need this new purge system, and I could write that, or I could write a spec for it and make somebody else do it.
Yeah, I go back to the PHP conversation, just because we did get a lot of feedback on it last week. It seems like maybe it is somewhat falling out of mainstream popularity. I guess that's probably putting it mildly, but it still seems so functional.
I think basically the thing was that before, something like Ruby or Python that required you dedicate an entire instance to it was impractical. Now with virtualization, it's a little more practical.
Right.
But you know what? Take your cloud and shove it.
Hey-oh.
Did you see that new website? It's dev null as a service.
Yes. Yes, that is funny. I'm going to go pull that up right now.
Yes.
I think I saw that. Caught our subreddit.
I haven't finished making the website, but I do own thecloudisalie.com.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Which I haven't decided if it should be a site talking about why the cloud sucks or if it should be my cloud hosting service.
Dude, yes.
It's like, I had that idea of like own clouds in a jail with
Yes.
automatic deployment.
That's what I was just going to say.
Yeah.
I didn't want to spoil it.
It's a long domain, though. Thecloudisalie.com is long.
Could you come up with a short acronym for it, too, maybe? And
Probably. But yeah, the main website could be thecloudisalie.com. But, your account would be like username.shortdomain.com.
I should probably give a mention to Coder Radio this week, episode 73. Mike talked about how, he kind of went down this path of Heroku and Azure and like really embracing, because he would write front-end client-side apps that he just needed some plug-in back-end infrastructure. But even for that kind of use case scenario, he's been finding, actually, there turns out to be a lot more scenarios where it's nice if I have my own servers and I use some kind of containers technology like Docker or Jails to run it there on the metal, and I'll just buy one server, rent that out, and run it there. And so it's interesting, in this episode that we did this week, he kind of chronicled he swung way far to the cloud hosting end, and now he's not totally given up on that. He still sees use cases for it, but he's more in the middle now, and we kind of talk about that.
Well, the cloud always promised to save us all this money, but
no.
Only in very specific situations might it save you a bit of money.
Right.
It's like basically if you need to, use 3 servers today and then 100 servers tomorrow and then back to 3 servers the day after that, then the cloud might be able to save you money.
Yeah, that's kind of,
whose load looks like that?
Yeah.
It's like a base system that can, dynamic load on the cloud might work, but
very true. Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah.
It also depends. If you're thecloudisalie.com is already taken because I own it. Sorry, chat room.
Yeah.
But depending what you're doing, and if you're a startup and you have no budget, then the cloud can be useful because you pay a couple dollars or whatever. But dedicated servers have gotten quite a bit cheaper, and when we needed 96 terabytes of storage, it was a lot cheaper to buy that than to try to rent it. Even dedicated server renting it, we were going to pay more per month to rent the hardware than we would to lease and own the hardware. It was for a third as much storage, the monthly dedicated server rental was going to be more than the price of leasing the hardware over 2 years and buying a gigabit unmetered connection.
Mm-hmm. And then for me, I have for what I need, I have a pretty good connection here at my house. And so, and the other thing that's nice about it is it's unmetered, right? It's however much I want to use. And so I have started bringing more services back home because A, security, B, performance, and 3, I can, right? I have the skills, the bandwidth, and the arrangement, so I'm doing it.
And you also have the advantage of being kind of like me, is you don't very often leave your house.
Yeah, I don't. I'm too busy sitting out here doing these shows.
Well, I'm attached to this gigabit LAN, and I like it that way.
Why would I ever leave? This is Mecca. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, well, any other thoughts on that story, on the PHP story?
No.
Okay.
But on the last one, there was a company, I forget their name. I have a link somewhere. I'll have to find it. Where they did a study of renting versus actually getting space in a data center, and they found that for their use, not using the cloud was actually cheaper.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me at all. I like you said, there's definitely use cases for it, but they're maybe not as wide as we thought they once were. And if you find the right deal for the right use case, then it makes sense, and I say go for it. I don't discourage anyone from doing that. But I do want to encourage people to go to our second sponsor this week, and that is Ting.com. Ting is mobile that makes sense. My mobile service provider since the beginning of the year. Wow, it's been a while now, and I've got the HTC One now. That's my current weapon of choice. I am watching that Nexus 5, but I'll tell you, HTC One still got a lot of nice competitive advantages to it. And when you combine it with the excellent Ting service, well, now you're cooking with gas, maybe even jet fuel. Now, what makes Ting different? I'll tell you what makes Ting different. No contracts, no early termination fees, and real Canadians answer the phone when you call them immediately. At least if you call them between 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Eastern time. That's in the Allen time zone.
Right.
You just call 1-855-TING-FTW, and a real Canadian will answer the phone. Now, when you go over to TechSNAP.ting.com, that's where you're going to want to start because you're going to save $25 off your first device or $25 off your first month of service if you bring a device, and Ting's got all of those outlined. Go check out how they do their rates, and also go check out their devices because they got a ton of great Android devices, new and used. And remember, all of them are off contract when you buy them, which is awesome. You feel so empowered when it's all said and done, and you've got your new Ting phone, you've got your new Ting service, and you're contract free. I think you'd be surprised just how good that really feels. Go over to TechSNAP.ting.com, then go look at their rates. Pay for what you use. They take the megabytes, the messages, and the minutes. They add them all up. Whatever bucket you fall into, that's what you pay for. They're extremely competitive rates. Average Ting bill is like $21 per line. Mail Hauler in our IRC chat room, he's a frequenter in our IRC chat room all the time. He said earlier today they've got 3 phones on Ting now, and I think they're paying $44 a month. Right, was their first bill. $44 a month for 3 phones. And what's great is all 3 phones shared pooled minutes on one line. You just pay a flat $6 a month for that line. So then if you use more, you pay more. If you don't use it, you just pay that flat $6, and the next month you pay more. Also, all Ting plans include hotspot and tethering, which is great because now I'm buying my tablets with Wi-Fi only. I don't need to worry about getting a tablet with 3G because I know I've always got my phone on me, and hotspot capability is just one click of the setting away. I don't have to worry about some extra fee or having some sort of special data plan. And if you watch the telco industry, all the major telcos, not Ting, but those big guys, they're all about to announce rate increases. Oh, yes. They're all about to announce rate increases. Also, something kind of interesting that I don't know really why they're doing this. One of the top 2 telcos is selling off all their cell towers to another company. They're not even going to own or operate them. It's kind of awkward. But
they're going to be like, we'll have cell towers as a service.
That's what they're doing.
We'll just put it out in the cloud.
But you know what? As I watch the cellular industry, I can kind of see where they're going with this because it's not the MVNO approach because that's much cleaner, much more straightforward, right? But it's still kind of like...
Right, because that's what Ting is.
Right. But what Ting does is they build on top of an awesome infrastructure. They use the Sprint service. If you've got good Sprint service in your area, then you're going to get great Sprint. You're going to get great Ting service. Let me tell you, for me, I think the Pacific Northwest was a trial area or something for both LTE and their WiMAX. So I had an Evo 4G. I get WiMAX capability on that, and then on my HTC One, I get LTE. It's awesome. I get like best of both worlds. It's really awesome. When you combine that with you only pay for what you use, you only have to worry about, if I'm only using the phone this month, I'm not going to pay into some sort of plan that I'm not getting my value out of. That is ridiculous. And in the holidays, I end up using the phone more. I would likely get an overage on the other cell plans, not with Ting. So go to TechSNAP.ting.com. Go get started. Unlimited devices on one plan, a powerful online control panel, plus a great Android app that lets you manage your account. It's a no BS mobile service provider. Go check out TechSNAP.ting.com. I think you'll be pretty impressed. Also, tap that savings calculator. Put your bill in there. See what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Just their online control panel is worth the switch alone for tech-savvy people. It really is. I activated multiple devices. I've turned devices off. I've bought, ordered, activated everything from the dashboard within a couple of minutes. It's really awesome as a tech enthusiast. And they're using really good back-end technology, too, so I like that. So go to TechSNAP.ting.com, and thanks to Ting for sponsoring the TechSNAP program. Okay, Alan. Now we got another news story, and this one I'm hoping you're about to announce the death of Captchas. Am I in the ballpark?
No. It's the opposite of that, I think.
Okay. Oh, darn.
So researchers at a software company called Vicarious claim that their software is now able to defeat 90% of all CAPTCHAs.
I hate CAPTCHAs, Alan.
CAPTCHAs are designed to protect us from bots, right? So, when you go to post a comment, it has a CAPTCHA, and that CAPTCHA ensures that a spammer can't post automatically, only a human can. So software that can defeat 90% of those would allow spammers to take over the internet. So Vicarious on their website says, Vicarious is developing machine learning software based on the computational principles of the human brain. Our first technology is a visual perception system that interprets the contents of photographs and videos in a manner similar to humans.
Oh, great.
So while developing that as a sanity check on their software, they threw some CAPTCHAs at it. Because, we've seen now the CAPTCHAs getting so hard, humans can barely read the damn things, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And they claim that using this technology, they can defeat 90% of the common, anti-bot technologies.
I hate CAPTCHAs. I've always felt
Yeah.
like they were kind of a crap solution, and they're very ugly to begin with. Just on a website, when
Yes.
you're designing a website, they're extremely ugly. So I was hoping you would tell me well, this is kind of proven they don't work. So you think instead we're just going to get harder, stronger, uglier CAPTCHAs?
Some people suggested that, and Vicarious is like, well, we can just teach it to keep defeating those. You're better off switching to something different.
Oh.
Interesting one I saw was the on openbsd.org, theirs is ASCII art.
You could have some fun with it. You could have some. I could see that. Maybe that's what they'll do.
Well, just because the ASCII art is harder to recognize. And also, I think, in the actual HTML is drawing it, they have some obfuscation so that you can't just parse it easily. But mostly, I think the protection in that method is just that there's not that many people doing it.
Mm-hmm.
So Vicarious hasn't released a paper or any code. All they have is this demonstration video. So, if their claim is true, that could be a huge setback for the internet. And because not only are they often used to, stop bots from signing up for things like Gmail or whatever, or, filling out comments on a WordPress blog, they're also used to defend login systems, right?
Yes.
If you fail your password at Google 3 times,
Yep.
it will make you enter a Captcha next time.
Yep.
Same goes for PayPal.
Yeah.
Well, if a bot can defeat those, they can keep trying, and that's bad. So the creator of Captcha, Louis von Ahn from Carnegie Mellon University, said, "This is the 50th time someone has claimed that they've defeated CAPTCHAs. I really don't get how this is news."
Well, okay, but this one's got a great video that actually shows it happening, so that might
Yep.
be grabbing more attention.
And as a check on some of this, so the writer for Science Magazine was a little skeptical about, that video. It was like, well, you picked the ones that worked or whatever, right? So the writer of the magazine got on a Skype call with the CEO and one of the scientists from this company.
Oh, no kidding.
And sent them 4 CAPTCHAs that he had selected. One was reCAPTCHA from Google, defeated. The login CAPTCHA from PayPal, defeated. Then the scientific magazine guy got a little sneaky. He threw in one that had Cyrillic characters. And that didn't work. And the company's like, well, we haven't trained it how to do other languages yet.
Well, and I'd probably screw up that one.
Well, yeah. I wouldn't know how to type that symbol on my keyboard. How the hell am I? That's cheating.
Yeah, you can't really use that.
Right. And then the last one had a checkerboard pattern. So in the background, so that each letter was like half white on black and half black on white. And some optimization they did in their software was making that not work very well. And they said they compared it to the optimization when you put sunglasses on so you can see better when it's bright out. They don't help so much when it's dark out. And they kind of take away some of the contrast or whatever. So like our app could defeat that one if we took out this optimization that makes it much faster at defeating a lot of other ones. So, their program could be like, oh, I couldn't defeat that, so let's try the slower way and see if that defeats it or whatever.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, the video does look pretty cool, how they're like pulling out the individual letters and bouncing them around until they kind of match up with the note and shape.
Yeah, I was impressed by that.
Yep.
I wonder, okay, so what I see this as
Actually, the one I thought of was, remember that font somebody was trying to pass off
Yes.
as a way to do encryption?
yes, because you couldn't OCR it.
OCR, yeah. That one might be useful in CAPTCHAs.
Yeah. Okay.
But if it's that specific font, then, all the Captcha guys all the guys trying to defeat the Captcha have to do is get a copy of that font, and then they can compare.
But the reality is we are dealing with a much bigger problem. Logins, right? And authorization
Not
and
just that, but
authentication.
yeah, all that stuff. Proving you're a human.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of places started slowly switching to these image captchas where, it's like, here's 6 images. Which one of these is of a dog?
Yeah, but that seems like you could eventually get around that too.
Well, it depends if you pick very random pictures of a dog. And, you could have a real dog, a cartoon dog, a stick figure dog,
Yeah, that's true.
That one, I think, it requires, as long as the images aren't, the same 10 clip arts every time, then it's probably useful.
Maybe I'm being a total noob here, but it seems funny that we can invent a dozen different cryptocurrencies that all represent large sums of money, and I cannot know you.
There's the one that kind of brings up is that the Bitcoins are based on this proof of work system.
Yeah.
So if you could just make it so that, in order to post a comment, you had to do 3 seconds of hard computer work.
That's kind of what I mean.
Then the bots would, it would make it so that it was really expensive for bots to do it, try to do a lot.
Exactly.
Although, you can just have a lot of bots and it still defeats it. So,
but that's kind of
a combination of things like that.
I mean, that's kind of at a large level. Some of the concepts behind BitMessage is that you would have to spend so much CPU time to spam the network that there's not a lot of scenarios in which that's a profitable outcome, right? I mean, there probably are some, but there's not many.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, because then you also have to have like a blockchain type solution and things like that. But it just seems like if I can send somebody thousands of dollars with crypto and they don't have to have any idea who I am, and I don't have to have any idea who they are, it seems like we should be able to solve logins and proving who I am without me having to submit blood or having some sort of national ID card. It seems like the math has a way of solving this for us. And captchas and
computers are good at
passwords,
math and people aren't.
Yeah, that's true. And people can remember passwords and read captchas. It's a tough problem to solve. Seems like this is just going to kind of put pressure though on to replace captchas. At least I hope so, because I hate them. I remember when captchas rolled out. I do remember the internet before captchas because I do. It was a much prettier internet. Not really. All right, Alan. Any other thoughts on that story?
Nope, not on that one.
All right, very good. Well, let's move right along, and I think that's all we had for the news segment, isn't it?
Yep.
Kapowsies! We got links to all this stuff, by the way, that we just covered in the show notes if you go to jupiterbroadcasting.com and then go to episode 134, and you'll find everything linked and noted there. Also, while you're over the Jupiter Broadcasting website, do us a solid. As the holiday season approaches, scroll down to the bottom. You'll find our affiliate links. You can click those. And then you'll automatically tag your shopping session with the support for the Jupiter Broadcasting Network. We've also got Chrome and Firefox extensions. If you grab those bad mamma jammas, you don't have to visit our site before you shop. It'll automatically tag it at sites like Amazon or Newegg or Best Buy and Woot.com. We've also got support and extension for versions outside the U.S. as well. And that's one way you can help support the Jupiter Broadcasting Network, keep us on the air. We have huge plans for the first half of 2014. We're going to start telling you guys about them very soon, but we could definitely use your support now as we start saving up for those huge plans. Really excited about what we got in the works. I don't know if we're going to pull it off. It's probably the riskiest thing I've ever done in my life. So we'll see. We'll see. But I could use your support. So if you want to keep us on the air, one way you can do that is through our affiliate system, and you can find links at the bottom of our site or also links to our open source browser extensions, which I appreciate very, very much. All right, Alan, with the news all done, it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. Thanks for sending your feedback to TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com or popping that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website, or even better, starting a thread in our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And Alan, are you ready for our first email?
Sure.
It comes from email, I believe is how you say it, an email from email. And he said he wants to talk about ZFS choices. He says, "Hi, I have some questions about ZFS. I watched the show since it started, and I've used ZFS ever since." Very nice. Yeah, okay, here we go. We have a pretty tight budget with we have to buy some SAN or NAS hardware. He's like, basically a regular computer with ZFS. It'll be free NAS or just free BSD with ZFS manually configured. The hardware is a commercial-grade motherboard with an i7 370 3.4 gigahertz CPU, 32 gigs of RAM, 4x4 terabyte Western Digital red drives, and 4 1 terabyte Western Digital Velociraptor 10K RPMs. Now, if he does a ZIL, he's going to have two 30 gigabyte Corsair SSDs. And if he does an L2 ARC, he'll have them on a 256 gigabyte SSD. So here's his question. How should we configure this for our purposes? We're going to use the 4x4 terabyte drives as the mass storage in a RAID 5. That is backups, templates, ISOs, and stuff like that. We plan on using the 1 terabyte drives as a storage for VMs in a RAID 5. Do we need or want the L2 ARC on a VM storage or mass storage? Do we need or want a ZIL for the VM storage or mass storage? And is a ZIL size of 30 gigabytes big enough? Should we just buy an extra ZIL and L2 ARC so we can accommodate both pools? What do you think, Alan? It's thick.
Yeah, that one's interesting for a couple of reasons. First of all, they didn't really separate what hardware they already have and what they want to buy, but it sounds like they already have all of this, and so yeah.
Yeah.
For the ZIL, you only need that on workloads where you have what are called synchronous writes, which are writes where the system call won't return until the data is all the way safely on a disk. Whereas most writes are asynchronous. We say, write this down, and you hope it gets there. And it's usually, like with ZFS, normally it gets there after 5 seconds. Right? So ZFS will batch up all the data in RAM and write it out every 5 seconds. So it gets nice, long, contiguous writes that are much, much higher performing than scattering it all over the place. So yeah, you only need a ZIL where you're going to have synchronous writes.
Okay.
Virtual machine images are synchronous writes most times.
Okay.
So yes, if you have a ZIL, you should definitely have a ZIL on the one where you're going to have the virtual machine images actually running off of.
Okay.
The one with the backups, you probably don't need it there. 30 gigabytes for a ZIL is big enough. That's about all you need. Because basically what it's going to do is when one of those synchronous writes comes in, it's going to write it to the SSD, return, let the performance stay high and continue, and then it will, as it can, flush that data out to the real hard drives. So yeah, 30 gigs is more than enough.
Okay.
I would probably recommend mirroring those. ZFS is more resilient now, but it was kind of, if one of those ZILs fails, then data that's been written to it but not to the other hard drives would be lost, and you don't want to lose data, especially on running VMs.
Yeah.
So if you set those two ZIL up as a mirror, then that would be better. Of course, if you really wanted to have a ZIL for the other pool that was going to have all your backups, then you might use one on each. But
so I know this is probably not a concern, but remember how you've told me, if you fill a ZFS file system up, you can have performance issues, right?
Yes.
So his SSDs are 30 gigs total.
Right. That's for the ZIL. That's not the file system.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Okay.
Yeah.
So it doesn't apply to the ZIL.
No. Basically, the reason for the performance problem is the fragmentation and everything caused by copy on write. Well, the ZIL isn't copy on write.
Gotcha.
Well, it kind of is, but the idea is that you're writing to it and then flushing it out to the real disk and deleting it. And the SSD doesn't suffer as much from a penalty from seeking all over the disk, right?
Right.
Whereas a spinning hard drive does.
Okay.
So yeah, for the L2 ARC, a read cache is always good. But again, if the second pool with, the 4 terabyte drives is just for backups, unless you really, really need to read that backup really quickly, the L2 ARC is mostly going to help you with reads where you're reading the same thing over and over again a lot. So it basically lets you fit more stuff in your cache. So I imagine it's most useful on the one hosting the VMs as well.
Okay.
If your workload is write mostly for the backup stuff, then an L2 ARC isn't really going to do you much good.
Okay.
But if it's, running VMs, then an L2 ARC is probably quite useful, yes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I can see that.
And the nice thing is you can just add more L2 ARC drives and it'll stripe across them later. So it's easy to add more later.
Yeah. So he's got 32 gigs of RAM. That's plenty. i7 3.4 gigahertz. That's plenty.
You can always add more RAM later, which is a nice thing too.
Yeah.
It's the easiest thing to add in a ZFS system.
Yeah.
He's in an interesting situation where he's going to end up basically having two pools, right? This one that's 4 terabyte drives,
right,
for mass storage, and then one where it's the 4 1 terabyte Raptors with 2 SSDs, and then 2 SSDs for a ZIL and one for the L2 ARC. The thing you have to watch with the SSDs is the endurance. The ZIL is going to get written quite a bit, but I think it's the L2 ARC that's really going to get thrashed because, basically you're going to be writing to it constantly. There are some sysctls in FreeBSD that you tune to set a maximum rate of how often to write to it to basically make sure you don't wear out the SSD unnecessarily. You could say, only ever write out, I think the default is 16 megabytes per second. The default is 8, which you probably want to increase to get performance. But it won't write out more than 8 megabytes per second to the SSD to avoid wearing it out too quickly. Because otherwise, every time you read something, it's going to try to write it to the L2 ARC to cache it. Whereas more often you say, just cache the first bit of everything, and then, the algorithm adapts over time to learn what's actually popular and what's not.
There is a lot to consider when you're building this thing, but the power is totally worth it, and the flexibility is awesome. And you could go the route I did, and you could get yourself a free NAS Mini. Alan and I are both big fans of IX Systems, and they've just recently tossed the free NAS Mini up onto Amazon. How about that?
Yes, you can now buy it from Amazon instead of
and if you use our
Yep.
affiliate link or our extension for the browser, you can support the network while you get a free NAS Mini now.
Yep. And they have lots of different versions. They have starting out with the one with no drives, and then they have different combinations of drives, and they also have the free NAS Mini Plus, which has an i5 instead of an i3 and twice as much RAM.
Ooh, oh yeah. There you go. There you go. Very nice. And that's just going to be, the great thing about that is that's a free NAS box that's just going to run and get updates
Well,
too.
the biggest thing is that all the hardware has been relentlessly verified to work perfectly with FreeBSD.
Oh yeah, cool.
Right? Whereas when you're building your own thing, sometimes there's always the question, does this work? Does that work? And that's why I've started, Scale Engine buys all their servers from there now, just because we know that it's going to work.
Yeah, they do some of the
like,
heavy
you remember when we
lifting
built
for
the very first one, we bought that Adaptec RAID card because it said on the box it would work, and then it didn't. That was
Yes.
With building it yourself, there was always running into these problems of there's a bug in the driver, blah blah blah. Well, IX tests all this stuff, and they have actual vendor relationships with places like LSI, so they can get custom debugging done if they really need to.
Absolutely. Okay.
So next question.
Next question comes from Chamoko. I don't know. He says, "Hey guys, I just wanted to say that I'm still loving the show, and I have a quick free NAS question for you." Well, doesn't that just fit? Very soon, my company is going to need to be able to store a few dozen terabytes of video, which should grow fairly quickly. Alan, I think you and I know a few things about that.
Yep.
My question is about the physical setup of all of this with FreeNAS and ZFS. If we buy a 24 hot swap server and fill it with 3 terabyte drives, what happens when we begin to run out of space? Should we just attach a large eSATA or RAID enclosure? How soon before we fill it should this happen? I know ZFS would want to add videos across stripes and mirrors as we extend the volume to fit more data. The data will be written much more often than it is read, but we still don't want to bottleneck the reads. Read sizes will probably be anywhere between 20 to 500 megabytes. Any suggestions for planning for a ZFS RAID type would be greatly appreciated.
Yep. I personally just bought a machine like this that has 4 terabyte drives. You might want to look at the 4 terabyte drives now.
Yep.
Finally, the premium's gone, and they're actually a couple of cents cheaper per gigabyte than the 3 terabyte drives now. Whereas before, there was like 25% more. Now it's like 5% less.
I just bought 4 terabyte Western Digital Reds.
I just bought 30 4 terabyte Western Digital Nearline SAS drives.
Oh, Alan. So you know what he's saying, though. I mean, his core question is really, what do we do when we fill up what we're gonna buy?
Right. So we specifically planned for this when we bought ours. So what we would recommend is in one of your card slots, you can put an LSI external controller, which will give you usually 2 external SAS ports. And then you can buy what's called a JBOD, which is confusing because there's that type of RAID called a JBOD. But basically, it's a chassis. It just doesn't have a motherboard or a CPU or RAM. It's basically a drive enclosure with a power booster. And you basically just connect it via some cables to the external host bus adapter or disk controller. So basically, inside that machine he's got that has 24 hard drives, he has 1 or more disk controller cards that are actually talking to those drives and connecting to the motherboard. He can just add an external one in like a PCI Express slot and then run cables to basically a second enclosure. It's a lot faster than eSATA and more reliable. And it's SAS, right, instead of SATA. And so we basically can have this second enclosure that you can fill with more disks.
And then create a volume from that, add it to the pool.
Yeah. And then he asked about when, because that shows that he's been thinking. It's a very important question.
Yeah.
So if you have one pool and, say it's 50 gigs and it's about half full, then you add a second 50 gig pool. When you do that, ZFS is going to try to balance the writes. So both of those 2 VDAVs in the one pool, this is all one pool, but you're just adding a second RAID set to the pool. it's going to try to make sure all of them get full at the same time. So if one is 50% full and one's 0% full, it's going to write twice as much to the second one, right? So that both of them will get to 90% at the same time. So that means your read performance is going to suffer, and read and write performance is going to suffer a little bit, because instead of using the max bandwidth of both virtual devices, you're going to be using more, or leaning more on the newer one to try to get it fuller. Mm-hmm. So the sooner you can add the extra storage, the better. And your other option is to use like ZFS send and receive to try to rotate content and rebalance it across the array. So if the first one's getting pretty full, if you bought two external enclosures or just made two VDEVs in the new one, then what you would do is, if the new one's got this more space, right? So if your first one's 50 terabytes and then you buy a new one that actually is 100 terabytes, you would create it as a new pool and then send all of the data from the old one to the new one. And then you could add the extra space from the new one to the end of it, kind of thing. And you would just kind of do this keep rotating thing in order to try to keep all your VDEVs to be as close as you can to full, so that your performance is better. But if you're not that worried about performance, right? If you're just bulk writing, then it doesn't matter so much.
Now, our next email. Are you familiar with Fusion drives? The Apple marketing gimmick for... That's not a marketing gimmick, but their marketing name for... where they take a SSD and a spinning drive, and then they have a software component.
Right. Seagate invented that, yes. So they were called hybrid drives.
Yeah. So, but the Seagate drive's like it's on one drive, right? Whereas like the Apple one, there's like two drives, and then they use a software daemon in the background to migrate. Okay. Yeah. So, and actually, performance reviews seem to say it works fairly good. I just...
The advantage to something like that is that it's easier to patch, right? If it's built into the drive, you're talking about like trying to do a firmware update or something.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's in the OS, it's easier to fix bugs.
Well, and for folks like users like my wife,
and also it's probably easier to debug.
For my wife, she's got all for her. It would kind of make sense because she has this huge photo library, but she maybe only accesses 100 of the photos on a regular basis, right? So supposedly the way this daemon would work in the background is it would move those 100 onto the SSD and the other 25 million onto the spinning drive. So,
well, I guess it depends how it does it. Normally, the idea would be that everything's on the spinning drive, and then the popular content is duplicated on the SSD.
I don't know. I don't know if it duplicates it or not. I think it moves it.
Possibly. Yeah. Which would give you the combined space of the two.
Yeah, you do.
But if I was architecting it, I would want everything on the SSD and then basically using... or everything on the HDD and using the SSD almost like an L2 ARC in ZFS.
Yeah.
So that way,
it's kind of
when I want to read something, it's there, and then I can.
Well, and if like
it would uncomplicate all the driver stuff. But the other kind of sideways advantage is if your hard drive exploded, the SSD would contain a copy of all of your really useful stuff.
Yeah. If it would work, the file systems are probably joined at the hip, but
it would just die. Yes, but.
So Gargan, I'm just going. That's how you say it. Gargan writes in. He says, "Hi, Alan and Chris. I wanted to implement a ghetto Fusion drive setup with one SSD and one hard drive, and this came to my mind. Even though Core Storage, which is Apple's LVM implementation route, is the most popular, what are major technical differences between that and a software RAID? So like an Apple RAID. As far as I understand, RAID 0 or RAID 1 defaults to the lesser size drive, so the extra space on the other drive gets unused, whereas an LVM." Are more J-body, a la Drobo solutions. Because if I understand correctly, if a drive in 2-drive LVM goes bad, the whole pool is kaput, right? I'm still mainly learning about storage spaces in Linux LVM and never messed with software RAID, so I'm a bit noobish at this. A nice online breakdown matrix would be nice. I think he's kind of got a couple of things confused. But
basically, if you're doing mirroring, then yes, you're limited to the size of the smallest drive in the set.
Mm-hmm.
If you're doing striping, or spanning, where you're just writing the data to all the drives, then you get all the space, but if one of them dies, you lose data on everything because your files are written partly to each different drive.
So, and he was asking, his subject was software RAID versus LVM. You can have a logical volume.
Mostly LVM is software RAID.
But you can mix them too. Like you could have logical volume sitting on top of a RAID array.
Right.
So they're not, not mutually
Really,
exclusive.
a logical volume was mostly just about having a little more control over how you partition the space, right?
Yeah. Yes. So
Does it actually do like thin provisioning or anything like that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I don't think so.
I'm kind of spoiled. I just use ZFS as the answer to everything. I talked to one of the inventors of ZFS about this idea I had. It's like, in my laptop, I have an SSD and a hard drive. If I made a mirror out of them, the write speed would be limited to the slower of the two drives, the hard drive, as opposed to the SSD. What if, you could write everything to the SSD and then write as fast as you could to the hard drive, but let it get behind? And he said that was a really, really bad idea. It's like, yeah. But for that specific case, FreeBSD developers have been working on getting some code into OpenZFS that's more intelligent load balancing. So
there you go.
When you're writing, you're still going to be limited to the speed of the slower drive. But when you're reading, because all the drives contain identical information, and you can have more than 2 drives in a mirror, right? You can have like a 4-drive mirror if you really needed to read that data really fast. It will be like, oh, well, this SSD is faster, so I'm going to read, 2 blocks from the SSD for every 1 block I read from the hard drive. Or rather, what it does is it looks at which disk is less busy and does the next read there. And so because the SSD is less busy, it'll get a lot more of the reads than the hard drive, but it'll basically try to give you the maximum read bandwidth that it can get out of all the devices combined.
He mentioned he was talking about core storage, which is an OS X technology. You actually can use that Fusion. You don't have to buy a Mac that comes with a Fusion drive. There are command line utilities where you could set this up on your own with an existing Mac. And there's also
another advantage of the software type solution.
Yeah. And there's also, I've seen a few like hack solutions where people are kind of implementing their own solutions. And I was just correct in the chat room that LVM2 does provide thin provisioning since recently, he says. Okay, well, there you go. All right, Alan, well, that's our emails for this week. How about that?
But I'm not sure that we understood the last question to answer it properly. But as far as trying to build your own version of that hybrid drive thing, just use ZFS and make the SSD your L2 ARC.
Or just buy a really big SSD.
That's what I did.
Yeah.
480 gigs.
There you go.
Although, when you're looking at, for the server, it's like, well, we have 2 options. We can get SAS SSDs to put into the hot swap bays, but those start at $1,000 a piece. Yeah. Or we could get regular SATA ones and put them like fixed in the chassis instead of in the hot swap ports, and then connect them to the regular SATA controller on the motherboard. We went with the SATA ones, and then we had to decide between, like, they have the Intel S3500s, and they're good for like a write endurance of 140 gigabytes or 140 terabytes, or the S3700s, which are significantly more expensive and smaller. So get the 200 gig one versus, so the 240 gig one was like $300 something or whatever, and the 200 gig of the faster one was like $600. But its write endurance was the entire 200 gig drive 10 times a day for 5 years, which is like 3,600 terabytes.
Yeah, wow.
Instead of 140 terabytes. Now, if you're going to make this your L2 ARC, that's kind of important because you're going to be wearing it out quite harshly. That's good. And also the other difference was the number of IOPS. Like write IOPS was like 7,500 versus 36,000. And things like that. But
well, I would like, you know what, actually, we did have a couple of discussion threads that didn't quite make it into the feedback section, but I'd encourage all of you to go check them out over at links.techsnap.tv. That's the TechSNAP subreddit. And there's some good discussion threads that are happening there. I almost brought them in, but folks have done such a good job answering them there that I thought I'll let those answers stand. But we'd still love to get your feedback, so email us, techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com, or pop that contact link at the top of the Jupiter Broadcasting website and choose TechSNAP from the drop-down. But Alan, with the emails all done, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Well, Welcome to the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. Now, the Roundup are stories that didn't quite fit at the top of the show, but we still want to talk about them, give you some links to follow up on your own after the show. And some of these links came from our subreddit over at links.techsnap.tv. And Alan, our first story in the Roundup, I have been looking forward to this announcement for about a week after I saw LeVar's interview on triangulation with Mr. Leo Laporte. He hinted that something big was coming. Well, here it is. It's announcing the Dark Mail Alliance, founded by Silent Circle and LavaBit, the two different groups that shut down in light of the NSA wiretapping scandals. It's pretty cool. They're doing an alliance together. They want to create a new open protocol with open source code. If everything pulls off, they'll be giving away server software code and LeVar
giving away or open sourcing.
Well, open sourcing.
Okay.
And he said in his interview, the reason why he's open sourcing it is because he said, well, if we can't have one LavaBit, maybe we can have hundreds of LavaBits. And so the way it's going to work is
this a replacement for SMTP or
all of the above? So it'll work. I believe it's going to work with it. But if
there'll be about the 1,000th person to try to replace SMTP as an email protocol.
Well, so I think the idea is if you don't have this, what they're calling email 3.0 protocol, then you'll just fall back to the old stuff. If you do, then you'll use the new stuff. So you could have groups of people who have this new system, and then they'll have encrypted end-to-end communications, is the idea. So they're working on it right now, and I think they'll probably be announcing a funding initiative for it at some point, but it's the Dark Mail Alliance, and you can find out more info at darkmail.info, which has probably already gotten the attention of the NSA. When you call it Dark Mail, you gotta get
and they should have found a name where they could have got the .com from GoDaddy for $1.99.
Dude, right? Totally.
Because, I don't know, .info always just makes it seem shady.
Yeah, well, I've got a .info. I got a, if you want info.
I've had some too, but no, they're not as bad as .biz.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen a legitimate business using a .biz? You just laugh at them. You're like, you're the only one. You realize.
Okay, but what bugs you more? Like the butchered grammar to make a .com work, like Flickr, where you butcher a word to make a .com, or if they just go with a .info or .biz.
Well, Flickr actually, it's a word.
Yeah.
But I really hate the ones where they just try to make something up and it doesn't make any sense.
Or they go like the delicious route, and then I still couldn't ever.
Yeah, it's like, so you're taking a word that's kind of hard to spell to begin with and then hacking it up. That's helpful.
All right, Alan, our next story in the roundup, I know it's got to be good because it's all in text. Trade-offs in cybersecurity.
This is actually a transcript of the keynote from the Cybersecurity Symposium at the University of North Carolina titled Trade-offs in Cybersecurity. So this is a transcript of the keynote if you want to just get all the details.
And links and references at the bottom of that. Very nice.
Nice, properly written.
And all in text. Now, this next story, I'm still trying to figure out what to make of this. It's kind of unbelievable. It comes from the Snowden leaks that he's provided to Greenwald and the Washington Post and others. They're still going through all of it. It's not a new leak from Snowden. It's from the documents he's already dropped.
It's the original one, but there's it takes a long time to read all this, decide what's important, and keep going.
This next one probably qualifies as important. And it's NSA infiltrates links to Yahoo, Google data centers worldwide. And they've got a picture of a PowerPoint slide that looks like it's got a handwritten sticky note on there where they illustrate how the NSA is inside the Google Cloud behind the front-end edge servers, which are what I would assume are like SSL accelerators or something.
Yep.
And they're just inside the Google data center grabbing the information from customers as it moves around. 180 million records were collected in January 2013 alone, new records, and they say those records included everything from metadata to text and video. Now, the NSA has said, this is BS. We don't do this. Now the story is changing. Keith Alexander's just since last night when I talked about this on Unfilter, now the story has changed to, if we're doing that, I didn't know about it. And that's also what Obama has said. If we're doing that, I didn't know about it. And that's what Google's saying too, but it's here. And it explains a lot of the discrepancies we've been seeing where supposedly they're just getting this data, but the companies are saying they're not voluntarily providing it. And if I was
it's like, so you connect to this Google SSL thing, and you're connecting to Google over SSL, so that they can't, their tap at AT&T isn't collecting this because it's all encrypted. So if they can get behind or on Google's SSL engine, then they can read the data before it goes back through Google's actual data cloud to do things like, do do the math to do your Google Maps or your Gmail or Docs or whatever.
It makes sense that inside Google's network they're not using SSL because they want it to be as fast as possible, I guess, and they feel
it's on the LAN.
Yeah.
Most people don't encrypt things going across the LAN.
Do you remember that story we covered about Google said they were going to turn on more and more encryption?
Well, like all Google searches are now over SSL.
Right.
Which is causing webmasters to freak out because they don't get the referrer data saying what keyword terms people were looking for. You know, they kind of freaked out when Google first started doing the SSL and not providing that. But not that many people searched over SSL, so it wasn't that big of a deal. Mm-hmm. But now every search is over SSL. So websites actually don't get full SEO data anymore.
Right. But that's negated if you're behind the SSL accelerator. They can the external traffic can be encrypted all day long.
The NSA knows what terms people are searching to get to your website, but you don't.
Yeah. Oh, geez, Alan. All right. Well, the next story on the roundup, we're going to get to another story that kind of goes more into that. So the next story in the roundup, Alan, is yours. Shell check.
Before that, somebody in the chat room is like, "This land is your land. This land is mine."
Oh no.
Awesome. So shell check is a thing I came across on Twitter. It's basically a static analyzer for shell script.
Awesome.
You stick your shell script code in it, and it tells you where you probably made a mistake.
That is awesome.
So like they have this example, and you read it over, and you're like, yeah, that looks like it does everything you would expect it to do.
No.
And then when you run it, it's like, oh, well, here's where it would break if one of the file names had a space in it. And here's where it would break if a file name happened to start with a dash, which is one people always forget.
This is so handy. Shellcheck.net.
Yeah. And it has like these tips about, oh, well, you're doing it this way, but you probably want to do it this way. Otherwise, this bad thing's going to happen. Or, if you put this star character here, the shell's going to glob it at the wrong time. Right? So like when you're doing a grep and you have .star, the shell's going to glob that and turn it into any file names that match. Mm-hmm. And it's going to say no match. And instead of grep actually interpreting that as its meaning a regular expression. So if you don't quote it, it doesn't do the right thing. And it's like here, you have variables like $F inside single quotes. That won't be expanded. Are you sure that's what you meant to do there? And things like that.
This is so. I'm reading about it right now. It says it detects problems with SA. Here we go. Here. How does it work? They have a little how does it work page. This is so cool. Good find, Alan. Good find.
I've been running my code through it. It's awesome.
Shellcheck.net.
Yes.
All right, back to the NSA. So the Washington Post has put up an infographic on exactly how the NSA is infiltrating private networks. And for all of our audience, you're already going to get this. You've already crocked it by the first time we cover this. However, this is a much easier to illustrate and understand and follow along infographic. So if you've got somebody you're trying to explain it to, we'll have a link in the roundup. You can go grab this, and it shows you sort of at what point in the transmissions the NSA would be grabbing the data, and how they'd be doing it, where they're collecting it to, and why. A really good infographic. They even show like where Google's worldwide data links are and where they could be intercepting data in those scenarios as well. Pretty interesting stuff. Google released a statement saying that they're extremely upset if this is true.
Yes.
It's funny. It's like, well, I guess that'd be bad. Yeah, that'd be bad. So anyways, we'll have that infographic linked in the show notes if you guys want to go check it out. It's a good one. They're really trying to make people understand what's going on.
It's like, for the amount of money the government is spending, they should have had these infographics on their slides.
And not a hand-drawn, The hand-drawn one has a smiley face on it, Alan.
It was funny because the first time I'd ever seen somebody do hand-drawn stuff on slides was actually at VBSDCon. Luigi was talking about NetMap, a system for doing like 40 gigabit per second stuff handled in software on FreeBSD, and he had some block diagrams, and it was just faster to draw it by hand and scan it or whatever.
Well, and especially if like the person making the PowerPoint isn't a technical person, and they go to the technical person and say, "Hey, could you give me a diagram of this?" It's like, what? All right, well here you go. Let me just draw it for you. Yeah, it works though. And
and so this shows all the place where the NSA could be spying on it.
Yeah.
They could tap into Google's privately owned fiber that just runs across the country, right? You could just put a tap in. Or undersea cables. They could have the GCHQ go to the building where the cable actually comes out of the water and connects to the land and put a tap in there. Or, they could tap at internet exchanges or Google owns a lot of data centers, but they also use regular, carrier neutral data centers. and they could get in there and do stuff.
We dug into this story. Actually, almost all of Unfilter last night was all about just new information regarding NSA spying, eavesdropping, surveillance on world leaders, and these updates on the PRISM aspect of the story. So, episode 72 of Unfilter last night, I think it was, covered all of that. Maybe we're going to see some changes now. I mean, maybe, because this 73 of Unfilter, this spying on the world leaders thing seems to actually be getting some serious traction. Once you spy on the elites, Alan, then you cross a line, and there's some heat being pushed on here now. If you've got these slides that come out that say Google and Yahoo are being tapped, they're going to put corporate pressure, lobbyist pressure on Washington to maybe change some of the stuff. Maybe pretty soon in the TechSNAP program we'll be telling you some of it's getting rolled back. Maybe.
All right.
You know what's not going to get rolled back? Music charts. That's right. You've heard us talk about hacking a lot of things, but now the music charts have been hacked. What's going on here, Alan?
Yeah. So a researcher in Australia was just wondering, with Spotify and so on, how hard is it to get to cheat and get on the top of their list?
Oh, sure.
Part of the reason is the way they do the royalties or whatever there is they get a set amount of money, all the money they make, and then they parcel that out based on how many plays each song got. So if your song's more popular, you get a bigger share of the money that Spotify has to pay out. So this guy originally uploaded some static and just random noises and badly converted MIDI files, and used Amazon EC2 instances to fake clicks on them and drive them way up to the top of the list. And some of the services banned them, but some of them didn't. And each time it seemed more like a human was doing it. Like somebody reported, hey, this song is getting a lot of votes and it's not even a song. And so that got it taken down. Where they didn't seem to have any automatic protection against click fraud. And so when he slowed it down and when he used a real song and slowed down the fake clicking so that it wasn't quite so astronomical, he managed to get his song to the top and get a $1,000 royalty check.
Hey.
For a song he didn't write.
Yeah, and he says his total out-of-pocket cost. I don't know about how before he got his EC2 bill.
I think he was using the free ones.
He said $30.
I was going to say, if he was using moderate EC2 instances, he would have spent $1,000 just running 3 of them 24/7 for a month. But yeah. And it also says that it could be an interesting kind of denial of service attack. If there was some band that was competing with you or that you just didn't like, if you did click fraud on their songs, it would get their songs pulled off of the chart. And that would actually, cause them not to get paid on top of everything else.
So that would be kind of like a DDoS in a sense.
Yeah. So you could remove your rival songs from the playlist and stuff.
That's dirty play, Alan. Dirty play.
Yeah. And so but mostly it's just pointing out where, online music sites didn't really think about this kind of thing when they were built, right? And so they need to start adding things like that.
I'm so glad you put this next comic strip in the show. So if you're not watching the video version, please go over to the show notes and go grab this link from the roundup. It's totally worth your time. The comic is titled, "This is Why You Shouldn't Interrupt a Programmer." And it's got a picture of a guy. He's working on some code, and as time goes on, he has to start storing more and more in his mind and starts observing the relational aspects of what he's working on and remembers the interdependencies and things he tried. And
stepping through a flowchart in his head.
Right, exactly. He's got it all built up. He's got it all tracked down. That's why we're working on this. We need to go back to this, make sure I follow up on this. And while this is connected to this, I need to make sure I have this debugged. And then, hey, so I just sent you an email about that thing. And it shows the comic, poof, all of that was in his head is gone. And then the guy has to go back
to staring at the one line of code at the beginning.
So I work at home with a wife and 3 kids. And I have been trying to nicely communicate a way to help them understand that when Daddy's editing or working on a show, he has a lot of stuff he's keeping track of at once in his head, especially when I'm editing, right? And I got a lot of stuff I'm connecting and things like that. And when you interrupt me, it's all gone. It's just totally, it takes me 20 minutes to get back to where I was. I know that sounds ridiculous, but it is really that bad. It is. And so I'm trying to come up with a nice way.
They've done scientific studies on how badly this happens to programmers.
Good, because I totally sympathize. And I was like, you know what? I'll show the wife this comic, and then maybe she'll understand my predicament, right? So I sent it to her. You know what her response was? I don't get it. What's the problem?
You're not a programmer.
She's like, yeah. It's like, no,
Yeah.
no. You see, there's all this stuff.
It's like, yeah, and it's almost like they know not to bug you while you're doing the show.
Right.
It's like you need like a recording light. When you turn it on, don't bug me.
Yeah. And what
of course, then you would leave it on all the time, and then it wouldn't be effective. And yeah.
Well, it was funny too because I saw this on Hacker News, and the first comment on Hacker News was, "Non-engineers still won't understand this." And when I sent it to my wife, who's not an engineer, she saw it and she's like, I don't get it.
I don't get it. Exactly.
Oh, I thought I finally could communicate it, but so that was a good one. And I know anybody that has a lot, they got to keep track of it once while they're working on something. Sysadmins run into this too.
Yep.
All right, good news for travelers.
You should have seen me last night trying to upgrade 6 servers at once and keep track of what was where and which one had been done and what step I was on. And
so you know what I'm talking about.
Yep.
Press release from the FFA, from the FAA to allow airlines.
So they announced that they've allowed, they're changing their guidelines to allow the use of personal electronic devices during all phases of flight.
Yeah.
Meaning you won't have to turn your Kindle off for takeoff and landing. As long as it's not heavy and you can hold it and it's properly stored if it's heavy and a bunch of other things. The biggest thing is that each airline will implement this at a different time because each airline has to validate each of their different type of airplane and make sure that the device doesn't cause a problem, even though the FAA did all this and basically found out that it doesn't ever affect the airplane. It's like, blur.
Yeah.
So you did all this work and found out that the airplanes aren't affected by personal electronic equipment, but you're going to make each airline go through and do it anyway. Seems like the company that does the testing got a kickback out of this or something. But anyway, so hopefully starting next year, you'll be able to use your iPod and stuff on an airplane without them constantly making you turn it off.
Yeah.
The one exception is really low visibility on bad weather, older airplane. When they need to make an instrument landing, they might still ask you to turn stuff off.
Now, Alan, do we have another PHP story on our hands in the roundup here?
No, this is a meta roundup.
Oh,
this is somebody else's roundup of a bunch of stuff that happened in the last couple of weeks.
Whoa, roundupception.
Yeah, and one of them is the PHP story, but a bunch of other stories I didn't have time to cover.
Gotcha.
And they got into more detail than I could.
Okay.
So it's they have a Blue Coat security blog, and over there they talk about you remember the programmer behind the black hole and cool exploit kits got arrested.
Yeah.
And they have a bunch of story on other exploit kit guys, like the next biggest exploit kit just jacked up his prices to be what the old one was.
Oh no!
Since he's the market leader now, right?
Yeah, it's a marketing opportunity for him.
Yeah, and it goes into a bunch of that stuff and a bunch of other stories that I hadn't had time to dig into.
Well, it's getting ugly for optical drive makers. HP is suing over price fixing. HP's filed a lawsuit against 7 makers of optical drive technologies, claiming the companies engaged in widespread price fixing in order to drive up the cost of Blu-ray, DVD, and CD drives for PC peripherals. And, you know, it's funny because I'd say they've been never cheaper. The suit was filed Thursday.
This is for between 2004 and 2010.
Oh, that's
so
actually...
after 2010 it went back down.
Yeah,
right?
that actually does sound legit.
But basically, they're suing Toshiba, Samsung, Sony, Panasonic, NEC, Teak, and Quanta Storage. And basically, they said that between 2004 and 2010, when DVDs and Blu-rays were the only way to do anything, that they kept those drives from getting cheaper. And I will admit, the fact that a CD burner didn't go down in price, basically, the entire time between 2004 and 2010 kind of proves that.
Well, and HP's buying thousands or more at a time, so they're feeling it.
And when they tried to go from, they're like, oh, Toshiba won't give us a deal, we'll go to Samsung. And it's like, oh, you want exactly the same price? You guys aren't even trying to compete on price with each other? That seems suspicious. And so they say that those 7 companies control 90% of the market and almost all of the patents, so that a new company couldn't come in and try to make cheaper optical drives because they would have to license the patents from the existing companies. And they say that they used industry events like CES to cover up their meetings to decide on what the price should be for the next year.
So they would meet in a back room at CES,
Apparently.
All secretive. Hey, grab the cigars and the booze. Let's go talk about our optical drive prices.
Yeah, apparently.
You hear about stuff like that, and you're like, nah, that's conspiracy theory. That would never actually happen. These big reps from NEC
in
and
Canada,
Panasonic.
In Canada, I guess it was a year or two ago, they actually arrested some people for a price fixing scheme.
Really?
It was the 3 gas stations in this one town would call each other every morning.
That doesn't surprise me that happens, actually. It's happening, it's
the
happening
bigger
in the
difference was
telco
they
industry.
got caught and went to jail.
It's happening right now.
Stand up for that kind of.
I would love to see somebody go after the telcos for this because it happens all the time here in the States with our phone providers. Now,
here.
we have a spooky presentation to celebrate the Halloween holiday, de-anonymizing users of French political forums, Alan.
Yeah, so on these forums, users are anonymous, and they're using various techniques to actually tie the identities together. And it looks quite interesting.
So here's the different techniques they can
mostly
use.
They're using Gravatar, which
Yeah.
is this online system where you can have one avatar and it works across multiple sites,
Right.
which makes sense, but it's all based on your email address, and so if you use the same email address for multiple accounts, it can actually end up tying them together. Now, Gravatar doesn't actually let other sites know what your email address is. It's all based on the MD5 hash of an email address. But so that's, because it's one way, they can connect all this stuff. And Gravatar is used by big people like Stack Overflow, GitHub, Hootsuite, Disqus, WordPress, etc.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I've seen it in a lot of sites. That makes sense.
Actually, one of the sites that does a more easy to read representation of like the FreeBSD mailing list even uses it. So, if anybody has their FreeBSD email address has a Gravatar, then it actually shows up, looks like a forum post with avatars.
It's kind of cool.
Yeah, and it's kind of a useful thing. But at the same time, it can be used to tie a bunch of users together.
Yeah. No, that doesn't surprise me, actually.
And if you don't have a picture uploaded, it makes this randomly generated one. They're just like these geometric shapes.
They're very Gravatar.
Yes.
All right, Alan. Well, our next story on the roundup is actually a video. The Cyber Dialogue 2013 video. Is this like a conference?
This is an advertisement for a conference that'll be in March.
Cyber Dialogue.
The University of Toronto is having, at their Canadian Centre for Global Security Studies, is having this conference in March. It's the end of March. And yeah, it's only 3 or 4 minutes, and it just covers some of the things that they want to talk about at there, including, there's people from the military being like, you guys got to get up here and do something because next time there's a big attack, there's going to be this big push to just militarize everything, and it's going to be bad.
Yeah, I was thinking about that last night.
Before it starts.
I was thinking about that
It's a lot easier to stop it from happening than it is to undo it.
Yeah. When you look at...
there's clips in there from people from the EFF, the ACLU, phone companies, Paul Vixie, who I think is one of the guys that invented DNS and all kinds of stuff like that.
We live in a surveillance state. Increasingly, consumers are using services provided to them for free. And that business model has the unintended side effect of facilitating easy, cheap, wholesale surveillance.
Both law enforcement folks as well as military folks say you might be part of a terror network, therefore everything has to be monitored.
I see a real danger of the state casting itself in the role of protector and being seen as the enemy of the people.
It looks like we have two sides. So there's a side of governments that support openness, and the other side is governments where they have black boxes.
Wow, that's deep stuff, and that's all really germane to what's going on right now.
Exactly.
Wow, Cyber Dialogue 2013, and we'll have a link to that video alone. Just looks like it's worth the watch. It's and
it's only 4 minutes, I think.
Yeah, yep, that's cool. All right, very good. Oh, that brings us to our last story this week on the roundup. Cryptography in the browser. This could be important.
It's from a company called Opal or whatever, and it's basically talking about how they can actually do strong cryptography in the browser using. What they did is they took NaCl, which is this C library for doing cryptography, and then used mscriptum to compile that down into JavaScript using LLVM, which is basically LLVM takes your C code, makes this intermediate code, and then you can compile that down into JavaScript.
Oh, JavaScript.
So you can compile C code you compile a C library into JavaScript so that you can run it in the browser. And at the bottom, they have this interesting, using the assembly.js optimizations, Firefox can do about 8 times as many hashes per second as Chrome, Safari, or even Node.js.
Look at that.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll have something there, Alan. Something to keep an eye on. All right, very good. Well, anything else you want to cover before we run this week?
No, I think that's about it.
Pow. So, ladies and gentlemen, that brings us to the end of episode 134 of the TechSNAP program. Now, don't forget, we'd love to have you join us live so you can hang out in our live chat room and help titles. Chat room, we need your bang suggestions. I don't think we've gotten a lot.
Yes. We need more title suggestions.
We need more titles, and then we'll vote at them at the end of the show. So if you want to join us live to participate in the conversation, hang out with us between segment breaks, and suggest titles, then you can do that by going over to jblive.tv on a Thursday afternoon at 1 p.m. Pacific, which is
4 p.m. Eastern, 2000 UTC.
And it's all changing because daylight savings is this Sunday. So go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar to get it in your local time zone.
And I will be awake when it changes.
You're hardcore, Alan. If I'm up,
well, I'll be in the middle. It'll be the middle of the FreeBSD party, right?
Oh,
because it changes Saturday night, right? Sunday morning.
Saturday at 2 a.m. I think, is that what it is?
Yeah,
Sunday morning 2 a.m.
I'm pretty sure I'll still be awake.
Sunday morning 2 a.m. I think is what it is. Yeah, which means just in time to mess with Last. Just in time. That's always how it lands. I swear.
Yeah.
All right, Alan. Well, I think that brings us to the end of this week's broadcast. Thank you, sir, for a great show, and thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP. We'll see you right back here next week.